right, you gonna walk along with us?
No, I gotta stay here. I got the librarian from across the street coming over in a little bit.
Okay.
I got some books that need to be cataloged.
Good deal.
Let me get your collar.
Fix me.
There you go.
All right. You gonna leave that there or take it?
You don't need me, Mike, do you? Okay.
No, leave it here. It'll be safe.
Bobby's here. He defends his territory with his...
No, I'm staying here.
Mary, you gonna come?
Yes, she's,
I can stay here, Mark.
well, if you want to, you can.
Comfortable.
Yeah, let me just sit here and enjoy myself.
Okay.
Okay. You want my glasses?
Back in business here.
Do you want my glasses?
You're not gonna wear them?
I don't think so.
No, I'm looking at something.
You can read that, whatever you want, sweetie. Go use the big old telephone over there.
No, it's probably more than a nickel.
That telephone. Okay. Okay, so we've approached Florida Department of Transportation, or FDOT, about putting a crosswalk across here, and they actually came in and did a study seeing how many people walk across. Well, the problem is most people jaywalk,
Yeah, that's
number one.
right.
Number two, they picked a time when school's out.
Oh.
So at some point I said they need to get them back over here, and they set up a camera over there, and on the days that camera's here, have a bunch of volunteers come in and walk back and forth many times.
Yeah.
I think there has to be 20 an hour or some ridiculous thing. But this road is run by FDOT. It's
I
not
remember you telling me that.
if it were a city one, we just put up one of those things like they have by the schools. Let's cross here. As you can see now, it's a big hazard. All right.
Where's a good place to stand for you?
Let's start right here.
Okay. Okay.
Let me mention the flags. These flags are all the flags that have flown over Alachua County with the exception of the Confederate flag. Why, I don't know, but the board voted not to put it up. This was years ago. And these were sponsored and financed by Allison Foles, who's the lawyer next door. And he did this for his father-in-law, and it's got a plaque indicating that. And this introduces the park. Now, the city owns part of the park, and we own part of the park. The line for ours is where the sidewalk is here. So we own the stuff to the left till we get down to the circle. They own on either side a Sweetwater branch. It's never been developed. It's a total of about 7.2 acres that make up Sweetwater Park that goes to Southwest 4th Avenue. And they maintain their part, we maintain our part. We put in our lights, we put in our sprinklers, and but they pick up the trash and so forth.
Yeah.
This is the American Legion building. Originally here was a building called the Chautauqua. It was a conference center, held about 2,000 people. It was made out of wood. It was built in the turn of the century or earlier. And it was here for many, many years, and a lot of famous, notable people like Williams Cullens Bryant gave talks here and so forth. I don't know whether it burned or just deteriorated, but at any rate, it was taken down in the 20s. And then the American Legion built this in November of 1932. They named it the Hazley Lynch Post after Hazley Lynch, who was the first veteran, as you probably know, killed. It's an interesting story. There's a Lynch Park over in South Maine also. His father, after the war, went over and actually found him and brought him home. So that's why it's named that. It was built in 1932, and originally this was a walkway on the west side. And on that walkway was a World War I museum, a plaque, which I'll show you in a minute. In 1949, they took the walkway out and added this section here, which was basically a bar for them. And then they had all sorts of functions inside with dances and programs and so forth. A lot of kids and adults went there for parties and dances and so forth at this building. We acquired it in 1992, purchased it from the American Legionnaires for $180,000. The city paid half of that from some leftover grant money, and they paid $90,000 with the proviso that we put our land as an easement as museum, and so it would not ever be anything else. So we actually started in November 11th, 1993. We got a big grant to do that restoration of $340,000. This was originally on the building before they added that section, and then about 1994, 95, underneath here it slants, and there is a small basement on this end, about 5.5, 6 feet tall, and then there's a crawl space of about 2 or 3 feet or 10 feet or so, and then it's I was crawling around under there looking for old bottles or tin cans, and my knee hit something and I pulled it out of the sand, and this piece was there. It was broken. Someone had attempted to cement it back together and messed it up badly, and we got O.T. Davis with Monument Company over at Evergreen to clean it up, and then we got some welders to build this frame for it. And this is the only one known to exist of World War I veteran memorial. You don't want to go inside there, do you?
I don't think we'll have time.
Well, let me just comment about a couple of things inside as we go by. Inside, of course, on the right is the museum shop. On the left is a country store, and it's the leftover remnants from Mary Barrow's antique shop that was the Barrow Family Antiques at the 418 building, and Gene Marshall, who had a bunch of antiques and the country store stuff. And our master carpenter, Bill Hammond, built the counter, and then the rest of it was brought in as on permanent loan by Mary and Gene, unless they try to change it around. So this was acquired and opened in 1993. This year will mark the 25th anniversary. All of these plants that are in here were all brought in, except for the big trees and big palms. But all of the shrubs and coonties and so forth, we're big on coontie plants because those were the plants used by the Indians as a food. They took the tuberous root and they cleaned it and they washed it in the creeks, and then they used it as a staple. It's called arrowroot. You could buy arrowroot in stores.
Yeah.
Now back in the back, we'll just walk back there for a moment. The Sweetwater Park goes from University Avenue to southeast 4th Avenue, and it has about 100 feet on the east side and about 200 feet on the west side of the creek. It's never been developed. The only building that's ever been here is a Boy Scout hut, which was back here, which deteriorated and rotted, and so it was taken down. There are 4 or 5 of these Boy Scout huts built as log cabins, and one was left behind the Baptist church, and it was moved out to the YMCA count on 441. Now, there are over 1,400 plants that have been brought in here, all native. Richard Berry, who's a landscape architect, designed this whole thing pro bono, and he helped us acquire the plants. A lot of them were donated and given. Others were bought at a discount. We got a lot of them from a nursery in fact, the majority of them in Hawthorne called Chiappini's Native Plant Nursery. And so all of the plants that you see here, except the large ones like these large palms, were brought in. And of course the big trees over by the creek. But the rest of them were brought in. I wanted to show you the highlight of this, or what I thought was the highlight, begins over here on the right where those plantings are. And that's called an alphabet walk. It goes all the way to the circle and then down to the house. Has 120 species of native plants in it, arranged alphabetically by scientific name. First one is Acer, which is a maple. The last one is Zamia, which is a Coontie. And so, and these are labeled for the most part. That I used to maintain that, but it needs some repair now and some replacement of plants that have died when the water system went out 6 months ago.
Yeah, and I think we're going to work on the signs too.
Yeah, they need some new signage and so forth and so on. But there was a Boy Scout thing that had a Bartram walk over there with Bartram plants, and that's gone into disrepair also. When we bought this property, this was filled like a wooded, forested area. There were 30 or 40 homeless living in here in tents and so forth and so forth. And the city and us, we had an agreement we would help develop and put the plants in on our part and their part. They would put in their lights and they'd put in their sprinklers. We would put in walkways and so forth, and we got a grant, the city did, to put in the cement walkways. There used to be a road for Southeast 1st Avenue that went right by the Matheson House within 6 feet of the Matheson House. We got the city to close the roads, fill it in, and make it all part of the park and put in cement walkways. So there are 1,400 plants, native plants in here. There's the alphabet walk. I was very proud of this concept, and I mentioned it to Meg Niederhofer, who was city arborist at the time. Yeah. And Meg said, "Oh, that's called a Synoptic Garden. They have them in Boston and New York." I said, "Oh, really?" So burst my bubble there, but anyway.
Not your idea after all.
No, she helped, you know, the naming and design and so forth.
You know everything about plants as well as so many other things.
Well, I got into it big time at my office. I met a guy that raised native azaleas and native plants from Madison named Salter, and he's the one that decorated Tallahassee. They have beautiful spring flowers all over there and a lot of native plants. Yeah. And he and I became friends. He used to bring me to my office rare native plants and native azaleas. So I got interested through him. Now, this lot was owned by the attorneys, and there was a house here. And in the late 90s, I tried to negotiate with Allison Foles many times about giving us half the lot or selling us. Well, he couldn't divide the lot legally. It's too narrow. Number one. Number two, he said we may sell the property and I want to keep it intact. And number three, he just wouldn't do it. So we asked if we could get an easement to put in a parking lot. And he said no, he didn't want to encumber it. So this rocked along until, I don't know, the late 90s or so. And we finally worked something out with him. Trying to remember, what's the radiologist's name? I mentioned it last week, and his son was a city commissioner. It'll come to me, but anyway, he was raised with Allison, and he was our president at the time, and so he said, I can go over and talk to Allison and work something out.
That's right.
And he went over, and I didn't go with him, and came out after a while, and they'd worked it out. So we do not own this property. We paved it. We paid to pave it with money from Alan Squitieri, but we got a permanent easement on the west side. They have the east side, and it's essentially like we owned it without dividing it. So then Mary Ann Coffrin and Dave Coffrin gave us $130,000 to put in this parking lot here. And that was put in the late 90s. They put in some nice labels for these new additions here. This one for Tom Fay. Over here is something we should note. This is called a Liberty Elm. And the Sons of the American Revolution came around planting Liberty Elms all over the country, for usually on Arbor Days. There's two of them here. There's one over on the western area also. It's a oak, a real Natal Oak, which is a rare oak. But in the old days, they used to meet under these trees in Washington, Philadelphia, and they were called Liberty Elms or whatever. And this one, it was done in 2009, and it was just a tiny little plant. Over there is a 50-year, I see when it's to be dug up. 50 years goes by very fast. Time capsule put in 2000. So that was 17 years ago. So it's buried right there, and that's marked there, so we will know where it is. Okay. Do you have a way to get in the Matheson house?
No.
Well, we don't need to go in there. I don't know who paid for these things. Those are expensive. All right, I wanted to show you a couple of plants before we go to the Matheson house. One of my favorites is called the Fringe Tree. Where I come from, they called it grandfather's beard or old man's beard. It's a fringe tree. It's a native. Ooh, that tree does need to come out bad. It's the one they're talking about. Now, there are two types of native azaleas. The first ones are pinkster. They bloom early. They've already bloomed. Here's the residual of one. Sometimes they're white, sometimes they're pink. And the pinksters are called rhododendron senescens. And then there's an enclave of these that are called Florida flame, which is what these yellow ones are here, which to my mind are extremely beautiful. About the prettiest thing you've ever seen. These have a scent. This is rhododendron austrinum, and it blooms about 2 weeks after the pinkster does. And it's called Florida flame. And these are very finicky. They don't like to be dried out or whatever, but these seem to be healthy here and here. Now this is an interesting tree. Do you have any idea what this is? It's tung oil.
Really? Really?
Hundreds and hundreds of thousands of tung oil plants planted in Alachua County in the 20s.
Yes.
As a staple, it was used, the tung nut was used as a oil base for paint. There was a tung nut factory over by by the cemetery, and that building's still there. But it made a very good oil for paint, but with the new acrylics that just drove them out of business. So anyhow, these are growing wild occasionally along the roadside, and I dug some up and put them in here. I shouldn't have. I should have put them over there somewhere because they went nuts. Now they need to come out, but they have a beautiful bloom. But they have a tung nut that's about as big as an orange. It'll have later. And my brother, who was a physician up in Northwest Florida, said every year he'd have 3 or 4 people stop by the office that had come from Tallahassee, and there were numerous groves on that Highway 90.
Yeah.
And they would come in very violently ill and throwing up. And he would say, what did you eat? And they'd show him this tung nut. Did you know what this was? No. Well, why did you eat it? Well, we thought it was a fruit.
Really?
And he said, well, go to a motel, stay there, drink a lot of water, in 3 or 4 hours you'll be fine. It won't kill you, but makes you violently ill.
Oh, I would
And he said that happened all the time. Okay. Now this is the Matheson House. By coincidence, it happens to be adjacent to the American Legion building. This was built, the first building built in Alachua County was in 1853. And that was James Bailey. That's still there. It's privately owned. Hopefully someday somebody will get it and restore it, and there's talk about that, but nothing's happened. But this building and the Hale House were started at the same time in the late 1850s. Well, the families that had moved down from Camden, South Carolina, there were several of them. There were the Mathesons, there were the Hales, there were the Chestnuts, and some other families that moved down here about the same time. The men were trying to start a new life. A lot of them had served in the Seminole Wars and with General Edmund P. Gaines, and they had seen this area, and they were growing Sea Island cotton and oranges this was a big cotton field and orange grove out here. This was out in the country actually. And so they decided to all move down, and one named James Douglas Matheson, who was about the 5th son, there were 10 or 12 of them in the family, he came down and checked it out and decided to move down here. And they started the house and they started the Hale, but the Civil War came and they all signed up for the Civil War. And fortunately, none of them were killed, and they came back and they continued the house, and they've both finished about the same time in 1867. So this is the second or third oldest, theirs is the second or third oldest house built. Now the interesting thing about this house, we call it the Camden Connection, because many of the houses in Camden have this situation where the columns come down in front of the porch rather than onto the porch. And the Hale house is exactly the same. And as a matter of fact, so is the Bailey house for some strange reason, though it was built a lot earlier. And they were from Alabama. So I don't know why that was like that. But anyhow, this is called the Matheson House. It was finished in 1867, and then James Douglas apparently was going to Cedar Key to visit or to fish or whatever. He met Augusta Florida Steele, who was the daughter of Augusta Steele, who was very prominent in our history. And Augusta Steele was a Renaissance man. He was a poet, an artist, a writer, a newspaper man. He was a judge, a port controller, and all this kind of stuff. And he originally went to Tampa, and he platted the first map, and we have the original map, which he probably drew, but we're not certain, and a picture of his house there called Casa Bonita. And he got into an altercation with the Army in Tampa because they were building Fort Brooke and they were going to confiscate part of his land. So he basically said, I'm out of here. So he sailed north till he got to Cedar Key, And then he settled Cedar Key, and he settled at Seney Odie, an island off Cedar Key, and had a community there of 30 or 40 houses till the hurricane took care of that. But he was very influential in Cedar Key. He had one daughter, Augusta Florida Steele, and she married James Douglas Matheson and moved back here, and he gave a lot of the stuff in the house. In fact, the living room is mostly his stuff, and that's called the Augusta Steele room. And there's a very fine portrait of him that he gave them that's in there in the house. So Augusta Florida Steele and James Douglas Matheson, and they had 4 children, 2 girls who died in infancy from rheumatic fever. It was common then and generally fatal. Most families, there was about a 20 to 30% mortality. Rarely did you have 6 or 8 siblings raised that made it through. And they lost the 2 girls. And then there was one named Steele Matheson, Chris's older brother, and he was on a hunting thing in Hawthorne with his friends in a wagon, and he forgot to uncock his shotgun, put it in the back of the wagon, it hit a bump and went off and hit him the abdomen. He bled to death on the way home. So that left Chris, I think it's 1876, I believe, when he was born. Very bright, very super smart. Went to East Florida Seminary, then he went up to Citadel where he was valedictorian. We have his address, and he already was a great orator and writer at that time. Beautiful, brings tears to your eyes. And Chris was a bachelor, and he was mayor for 10 terms, longer than any other mayor we ever had. When everything happened, the roads were built, the sewer systems were put in, electricity, water, everything was brought in during his tenure, mostly in that period. And in 1919, he was also a very devout lay preacher. Every weekend he went to 2 or 3 places. He'd go to Hawthorne or Newberry or where all the little communities around here, and he gave talks. They were really sermons because they had topics and he had notes. Chris kept a little set of these. The banks used to give them out many years ago, a little, not a diary, but a little thing you could keep notes in and had calendar in it and put your expenses, whatever. He kept one of these with his income every day and expenses every day. He kept another with his calendar of all the talks, and he saved all of these. And the third it was not a journal, but he would put thoughts or ideas for sermons in. And we have all 3 of those. Sarah had kept the same thing when she came here. In 1919, he wrote in his journal thing that he was making an important decision. And then the next entry is after he had moved. He decided to become a minister. He'd been called, and he went to the Presbyterian, and he went to them, and they put him through a quickie 3-month course and sent him to Shawnee, Oklahoma, and that's where he met Sarah. Sarah was raised in North Carolina. Her father was chairman of Davidson Board, and her brother went to Davidson. The girls went to the North Carolina College for Women, which was the equivalent of Davidson at that time. They all have masters and PhDs in education. And Sarah got her master's in Christian education. And the story that she told me was, and I have 12 hours of interviews from Sarah, was that when she graduated and got her diploma, the dean said, "Sarah, when you get through the ceremonies, I need to talk to you." So she went to the office and says, "What are you going to do now that you got your degree?" "Well, we're going to Lumberton. My 2 sisters and I have got positions there." Her sisters were PhDs in education, Mary and Martha. And he says, "No, well, you need to go out to Oklahoma. They need teachers for the Indians and the settlers out there." So she said, "I don't know anybody in Oklahoma. My family's all here." He says, "No, they really need you." And she said, "Okay." So off she goes by herself. She was 28 or so. Chris was probably 42. He was considerably older and a confirmed bachelor, they thought, and she was an old maid. And he pursued her greatly, and she kept thinking, well, he's too old. But then every year the family would gather in Montreat, and they had a house, and they would go there and for a month, all of them, for years and years. And so she went to Montreat, and he followed her, and the family fell in love with him, and they got married, and they were happy there ever after. So that was in 1933, I believe. In 1947, Chris developed early symptoms of Parkinson's disease, and so he retired after 20 years in the ministry, or 18 years, and they came back here. Sarah had not been, she'd visited here, but the house had been locked up all this time except for a nephew they put a door where the window on the left-hand side is there, and in that room they put a bathroom and a door to get in there and kept the rest of the house locked. And so other than that, nobody had lived in the house from 1919 to 1947. And they moved back in, and Sarah said she used a peculiar term that I've never quite figured out. We went to housekeeping. Instead of we established housekeeping, we went to housekeeping. I said, what does that mean? Well, we started with, whatever. Sarah was very smart, very articulate. She was church visitor for 40 years, called every infirm every week, went to visit everyone in the hospital every week, sent calls on the telephone for birthdays, amazing, and wrote these wonderful Christmas letters, of which we have all of them. And they saved everything. They had them in boxes here and boxes there. And they also had records from Augustus Steele. He gave them his records. That's where we found the two map, one of Fort Brooke and one of Tampa, first plat of Tampa. And so anyway, Sarah, once they got back, he died after 6 or 7 years, and died in the bed he was born in the back bedroom. And she, by that time, she was well beloved and well known and very active in societies and history things and so forth, and she knew everything about everything in the house. Every item in there she knew the whole story about, which was utterly amazing to me. But so we interviewed and went through item by item, every pot, every chair, everything. It's all on tape and has been transcribed, and it's a wonderful document, and then made pictures of everything. So in the Matheson House. So this is a antebellum house. It's set up the way she had it, except for this room. We had to put the window back, take out the bathroom. My carpenter guy, Bill Hammond, found some what's called pine, heart pine, at one of the older places here, and that matched the original, and you can't tell where he put the repairs back.
Didn't they add that section where his office is now?
This little building on the right here was added at some time. I don't know if they added it when they got back in 47, but they were using it as storage. And some friends of Chris's, a year, not long, one weekend said, we're bringing over something, and they went to his office, and he had locked up his law office downtown in the Chitty building on the second floor and left it totally intact, and they brought the whole thing over here, and it's in that storage room. It's a law office from 1919. Des typewriter, everything, his books, everything. It's amazing. Even the old map of Alachua County that we had is in there. So it's an amazing, edifice there. The only thing that was changed really was, and she wanted to be left like it was this room. We brought in a bed and a beautiful chifforobe from Louisiana made for a physician in the 1880s. And Bernie Webb, who was a professor sleep professor actually. Bernie just died a few months ago at Oak Hammock. And Bernie had this in his house, and when they moved, he and Mary moved, he said, I want you to have this. Well, the bed was one of these tall bed, with a piece coming, canopy bed. It was too big to get in there, and we had to take it apart and all this, that, and that. Anyway, we finally got it in there in the chifforobe. So those are mainly the only two pieces that have been added. Now, when Sarah was here, they brought her a dry sink, and I refinished it for her. And then she had little knickknacks all over the house on every table of her travels, and she traveled worldwide. And said, Sarah, the problem is going to be people walking through here. These things will get picked up. They're not monetarily of any value, but they're very valuable. So I said, why don't we build a cabinet, and then you label where they came from and tell me the story on each one of them, which she did. She knew the whole story This came from antique shop at Charlie who got it in Beijing or whatever. But anyway, so we built that cabinet on the back porch for all of her knickknacks with the countries that they come from. And otherwise, it's intact the way it originally was. Sarah died, I believe, in 1996. She was 94, and I was not her physician, but we were very close. She was like a grandmother, and I came to see her nearly every day. And she called me, and her doctor was John Crago, nice general practitioner here. And she calls me one day. She'd been getting recurrent respiratory infections, and they'd put her in the hospital for 2 or 3 days and give her antibiotics, and she'd get out. Though she was totally alert and so forth, after about 4 or 5 of these episodes, she calls me and says, I want you to go to your lawyer and draw up a letter and go take it to John Crago that says I will not be going back to the hospital under any circumstances. And I said, well, now wait a minute, Sarah, if you fall and break your leg or arm or hit your head or something. She says, no, you don't understand. I'm not going back under any circumstance. I've had a wonderful life here. Yeah. And I said, that doesn't sound like you, Sarah. I don't understand. Because you've always been a fighter and enjoyed life. She says, well, Mark, I won't die in the bed my husband died in. And she did about 3 weeks later. She got an infection. They left her alone, and all of her friends came and sat with her. So this is the story on the Matheson House. Now there's an interesting little side. They wanted us to put up rails. And of course, it's a hazard. No one has ever fallen off since 1867 off of this porch, ever, but it's a liability risk.
Sure.
But anyway, said, well, I'll tell you what, we'll put up rails and you can see where they've taken them down, but which they probably shouldn't do if the city ever complains about it. But there was a rail that swung over to the building, and when nobody was here or anything, you could bring it over and bring it to the post here, and so you couldn't get onto the porch. But that was my invention, a way to get around that. Now, God knows what they did with those rails. All right, so this is all part of the park. Sarah owned all this land all the way down to the creek. She also owned this lot over here to the left, and she sold that to the city to make that part of the park. I was involved with that and still alive. She was still alive at the time. The garden club put this in many years ago, this Camellia Garden, but it's not been, unfortunately, not been sustained very well. Unfortunately, the water system got turned off 6 months ago, and it's just now 2 weeks ago gotten fixed and turned back on. Because there's one guy that knows everything about
You mean the irrigation?
the irrigation system for here in the Matheson.
Yeah.
And they had this other guy, this yard bird, he didn't know anything, and he goofed it all up. Yeah. So it was off, and so Cal King and I came over here, and I got my guy who's named Jonathan Smith. This is another one of those Florida flames, my favorite.
Isn't that interesting?
It's just beautiful. The pinksters have all quit blooming. I mean, they're done. The fringe tree, there's one that just planted a couple of years ago that's taken off right there. Let's see if the banana shrub is blooming. Have you ever heard of a banana shrub? This was here. And Southern ladies used to pick these and put them in their pocket. Oh, well, that one doesn't have much odor. Let me reach up here and get here's one. Well, my sniffer's all out there. It smells like a banana, supposedly. A little bit. Anyway, that's a banana shrub. So the ladies would put 6 or 8 of these in their pocket. Little.
Like a perfume.
Yeah, like a little perfume. My mother used to do that. I thought she was nutty as a fruitcake.
You knew what she was doing.
Yes, she did. Now, one other thing we'll do when we leave here, I want to show you the street light around front. I meant to do that while we were there, but we'll end up there. This is the back entrance to the house, and that was put up for Sarah years ago. I want to tell you about this piece. This is called the Tyson Tool Barn. And this piece is the most interesting piece. I was aware that there was a horse trough in front of the red brick courthouse because I'd seen it on an old picture. Mm-hmm. And when they tore it down 1958, 1959, I had no idea what happened to it. The clock tower was when they took it down, a fellow named Ted Crom, who lived out in Hawthorne, who was a famous clock history guy and could repair anything. He was an engineer, Crom Corporation. He went down and got it and restored the clock totally in his warehouse, and it's in the clock tower now. Yeah. When Gary Jr. was mayor, he and I got a committee together, and we did something called an insurette, where we got an established architect and a couple of students, and there were 6 of them, groups, and they spent the whole weekend designing a clock tower, and the one that won got $500, and that's the one that's there now. It's a sort of a reproduction of the courthouse tower. Yeah. Well, anyway, I guess it's about 25 years ago or so. People used to bring me things to my office on East University Avenue all the time. Booklets and stuff, just stuff, you know. And so this lady calls me about 1 o'clock. I was working in the office, and said, "Dr. Barrow, I live over in Kincaid Road, and I've got something that y'all ought to have in the museum." And I said, "Well, what is that?" And she says, "The old horse trough that was in front of the red brick courthouse." And I said, "Really? How do you know it was the horse trough?" And she says, "Oh, my husband Johnny helped demolish it, and he brought it home, and we've been using it to feed the cows back at our barn. Sure. And would you like to have it?" I said, "Of course." I didn't have any idea the size or shape or weight or anything. And she said, "Well, there's only one little problem, doctor, and that is you got to come this afternoon because I'm moving tomorrow, and I've sold the property, and they'll be here tomorrow, and they will not give it to you." I said, "Well, give me a couple of hours." So I finished up. My friend Ed Bauer, who's my best friend, a local realtor, we go out there, and he had an old beat-up van, and we went out there to get this thing and emptied the water out, and said, it weighs about 400 or 500 pounds.
Yes, yes.
And I said, "Well, what in the world?" We couldn't budget. No. And we were sitting there scratching our heads about seeing it. She says, "Well, there's 2 big, long, heavy, 2-inch by 8-inch boards, and that's what my husband used to load it and unload it years ago." Well, that makes sense. So we put that in the back of his truck, and Ed would pull and I would push an inch at a time. We came up that ramp. When we got to the bumper, it broke the bumper off. So then we had to put it in the back of the thing itself. We got it up to about 2/3 of the way in. We couldn't get it another inch. So we had rope. We tied that thing real, and he got in the back and held the rope. And it was going to holler if it felt like it was starting to give way. And so we got it over here and backed it up and ran it down those slats and dropped it there, and it's been there ever since. That's the horse trough that was there. And for years, they had a horse patrol here every weekend, Thursday and Friday night, and I put water out here, and I would keep it full for the water the horses, yes. Which was sort of nice. Well, they've discontinued the patrol, but that's the old, and it's got water to it if you ever need to fill it up. The Tyson Tool Barn was a man named John Mason Tyson, Jr., and his wife, Jean. And he was a tool collector. And when we got into the antique business, he would buy tools from us. And then I got a list of what he was looking for. So on our buying trips, I would buy special things for him. And so he was also a master electrician. He was with a guy named Shorty Bean, and they were the only electricians in the 50s, and they did most all of the knob and tube wiring in town. And he was also a gourmet cook, and he was also a clown known as Dilly Dally. He was a Renaissance. He had one glass eye, big handlebar mustache, and was a rough, gruff voice, but the sweetest guy in the world. Well, he collected tools, and he had them all in here. On the left-hand side, he had a little shop. And so one day I mentioned to him Mr. T. Mary and I called him. He loved Mary, and Mary loved him. And I said, Mr. T, could we have a few of these tools to put in the museum? He said, well, I'm going to do better than that, Doc. I'm going to give you the whole thing. I've got it propped up where all you got to do is put it on the mover and move it over. And I'm going to give you $10,000 to move it. I said, really? And your family doesn't object? No, it's fine. It's all set. So he built this, let's see. Ooh, I didn't get my glasses here. 1992. He bought a kit from North Carolina, and he put it in his backyard because he filled up the house like I did with books and postcards and photos and all that. And my wife said, you got to do something with this stuff. Yep. Well, his wife said, you filled up the house full of these tools that's on every wall, and now you got to do something. So he built this to put his tools in. He had 400 or over 400 or so tools. So in 1998 then, he died, and everything came to us, and we got ready to move it. We went before the city, and it's 2 stories, and now it was going to cost $50,000 because of the grid lines, computer lines, TV lines, electric lines. It goes on and on and on. It was way beyond our capacity. So I knew a young carpenter that I had met named Jeffrey O'Meara, in his early 20s at the time, young man, and he said, I can move it. I've done 2 of them, one in North Carolina and one in Georgia. I know exactly what to do. I'll get a crew of 3, and so we packed up all the tools, labeled them, packed them in boxes where they went, and took pictures where they went, the way he had them, and they took it down board by board and brought it up. And they said it wasn't that hard because the frames and so forth is the old knob and tube, old pinions that you put in there, and you just knock them out and you can take the thing apart. The floors were in nails, but they brought it over. It took them 3-4 months and resurrected it on site. So the claim to fame is it's the only barn that's been raised twice. And so I kept adding other tools that I knew he would have wanted in here. So we have his 450 of his and about 100 things I brought in. And people started bringing in things like wooden trunks full of old tools, 2 or 3 of those kinds of things, and saw and just stuff. Yeah. And then a couple of years ago, a fella came in and gave us 180 things that he had in his house. So they're ready. They've got to figure out a way to display them in there. But this is a Tyson tool barn, and it came in. We set it up in 1998.
Well, this keeps the collection committee busy right now.
There's a lady named Dixie that's working on it, and I'm very impressed with Dixie. I've met with her a couple of times. And
she's doing a good job.
But I told a story last time, so I won't repeat it, about how Mrs. Tyson, when we got everything moved back in place, we didn't have labels, and I was trying to figure out what they were called, and we didn't have any information. And Mrs. Tyson had inadvertently kept the book that had all the information on it, which is in there. But Dixie has all that and all the photographs, and she's cataloging it apparently. Yeah. It's a treasure trove, no question about it. There's nothing like it probably anywhere as far as the number and unique type of tools.
This is wonderful, Mark.
So,
this is just wonderful.
Let's see.
You want to go to the lamp?
Yes, let's go to the lamp. Let's go this way though. Well, let me comment on this. There were some trees left here, the big trees like the oaks and so forth. This tree was here. This is a prunus called a Flatwoods Plum. There's 2 kinds of plums, wild plums. These are one of my favorite plants because they're the first harbinger of spring. They start blooming in late January or February. And as you drive along the roads a month ago, you see these bursts of white on the side of the road. These are native plums, and there's two kinds. There's the flatwood plum, which has a little tiny thing, it's bitter as quinine, and then there's the Chickasaw plum, which apparently may have been brought down here by the Chickasaw Indians. I don't know. It looks exactly the same. The bark is the same. The leaf is the same. But the plum is big and edible, and you can make jelly from it. So we have a bunch of both over in the west part of the garden. But this was a native one that was here. And, oh boy, I'm very concerned about this. They trimmed it way back. This little thing, it looks like a honeysuckle. It's called Christmas honeysuckle. It was originally here. This little thing here, and it has a beautiful little bloom in December. I never heard of it. Sarah knew about it. Oh, that's Christmas honeysuckle, and so forth. All right. All of this landscaping was brought in here except the big azaleas around the house. They were here. This is another very, very interesting, one of my favorite plants. It's a palm, but this is called a needle palm. We have some magnificent specimens here. I was going to see if I could see a needle in there. Usually, come on. I don't exactly see one at the moment, but though I see some real small ones down there. Let me get one. I can keep from getting stuck here. These things grow long, but they're very sharp, and the Indians used them as needles. They're called needle palms. And they get about this big. They don't ever get real big. They don't grow into trees. That's a nice live oak. And for some reason, in this park, at each of the corners, there's a major live oak. There's one of them there. And I don't know if they were planted, they were here. I suspect they were planted way back, about the time the town was created in 1853. This is the end of the alphabet walk. There's with the Zamia or Kunti plants. This is a Spanish bayonet. They're used in St. Augustine around the fort because they're very sharp. They'll stick the devil out of you if you're not careful. These are they just bloomed. There's some viburnum species. Nope. These are lamps that we put in 24. They put in about 30 in here. These acorn lamps. City put theirs in. We put ours in. The city put in this 4-inch well. This is all city property here. This is Matheson here. These oaks, the first one was planted by Sarah. I've got the date up front. I think they in 2000 or so, after they got the park cleaned up. But we put in the closed. There was a street through here, and there was a street out there. That was closed by the city and filled in. It was 3 or 4 feet down, filled in, and so forth. And then the Matheson oaks were planted on either side. They're now pretty nice specimen oaks here. The azaleas were here. Now this is the lamp. There were, I don't know, there were said to be around over 200, maybe 240 of these street lamps all over Gainesville. They were put in 1918 by Chris Matheson.
Like that?
Yep. They were all over town. When they came back, they had taken them all out and they were shipping them for the iron, for the war effort. And Sarah goes to the warehouse and there's one still there, and she gets it and brings it home. And she had it in her backyard. It was saved by Sarah in 1945. right after they came here.
But it was from 1913.
Yeah, 13, I said 18. 1913 they put these in. I don't know if it's working now at the moment or not, but it's got a switch. It should be working. They just need to check it all out. And this is the rest of the alphabet walk. A lot of it, unfortunately, has died. And what you have to do with this is about every year go through and replace the dead plants and so forth. So that's city property. It goes all the way over to Southeast 4th from there on. And we have the developmental rights, what goes in there, what plants go in there. The city and Arbor Day people have put in numerous trees and plants and watered them, and we have our own sprinkler system. Now, one little side story is it was costing us $900 to $1,000 to water this place because, well, number one, we had it on the water meter to the house. Well, in that you pay a stormwater runoff fee. So we said, okay, we'll put in another meter for just the sprinkler with that, and they won't charge you the stormwater. Well, that still costing $800 to $1,000 a month to water. So when they put in their well, a fellow named Pat Burns, who was head of parks, he and I gradually became very close friends. There were, like, at the time, 28 parks that they were responsible, cities responsible. It's a big job, and I'd get him over here, we need this, we need you this, and this, and he said, Doc, I got 28 parks. This is just one. Anyway, over time, he fell in love with the park because we were doing so much ourselves. Yeah. So whatever we wanted, we got. So he was getting ready to retire, and I said, Pat, what do you think about us hooking up to that pump over there? It's not going to cost the city except the electricity to run it for 2 hours every 2 days a week. He said, well, now, Doc, you know, you're not supposed to privately hook up to city water. But I'll tell you what, says you get your guy, and I'm getting ready to retire in 2 months, so I'll write a letter and put it in the file that you got my permission, and you go over there one Saturday when nobody's around and hook it up. So we hooked up to that fountain, to that well over there, and saved $1,000 a month.
Ooh,
he thought that was very funny. Let's walk back through this way. So, parking lot was donated by the by David and Mary Ann Coffrin, $130,000. We got a grant for $50,000 to do the house with Sarah still there, and the city applied for a grant to put in through the sidewalks out back here and to close the road. So that was all done. So it's been a very, very good partnership. And at one point we had an agreement, and damn if I didn't lose it, or I couldn't. Anyway, I've never been able to find it, but we had a written agreement with the city that they would, any trees that we needed cut down on our property, they would do it for us for free. Now they got all new city people, and they're balking on the deal, but I understand they're going to take out that big tree by the Matheson Museum up there. Let's see, where is that other? I was going to look. This is a nice specimen maple that we planted. I was looking for that other, here it is. This is the other Liberty Oak, called a Natal Oak, called a Liberty Tree. This is the other one on the property if you want to take a shot of that. Okay. See, somebody just planted a longleaf pine. a nice one. That thing will grow, grow, grow. These are some of those plums. It'll be loaded with fruit in about a month. They've already bloomed though. Here's another one of my favorite plants, just blooming. You recognize that? It's not marijuana. It's called buckeye. And this has a thing that looks sort of like a chestnut. It's a buckeye. And they're supposed to, if you carry them around your pocket, they're supposed to bring good luck. Preacher Gordon of the Presbyterian Church, he carried around a bunch all the time. People gave him, passed them out to friends.
Yeah.
Some people still have theirs in their pocket. Preacher Gordon,
I bet.
I see him every now and then. I say, I've got one. It's all polished up. The problem with this Synoptic Garden is some of these things are shrubs and some grow into big trees. Like this one here, which is one of the maples. But anyhow, Alphabet Walk or Synoptic Garden. 106 species is what it says. I'd forgotten
I was going to ask you how to spell synoptic.
that.
Now I know.
Yeah, right. Okay. Well, we can go back around this way.
Sure.
This sidewalk is big enough so the police can patrol it at night, and we've asked them to please come through every night and chase off because it's supposed to close down at 11 p.m. Well, you need to clean off the leaves off the top of that thing. We had to put that cage there because people kept coming in stealing the copper pipes.
I know.
This is a tree that's going to have to come out. There's a big debate on whether it's a live oak or a laurel oak. It has characteristics of both. And I've got it, it's gotten labeled as a laurel oak, but then a friend of mine who's a botanist, he looked at it and the acorns and so forth, and he said, I think it's probably a hybrid between the live oak and laurel oaks did hybridize. So it has characteristics of both. Now if we can run the gauntlet here. Go across the first half. But we want to put a walkway across here that gives pedestrians the right of way to get across here. Some point in time, or at least I did. We can make it. Well, if you ever want to do the inside of the Tour barn and the Matheson House and the museum,
That's
we
certainly
can do that later.
possibility,
Let's worry about that later. Probably ought to.
I think this has just been wonderful, Mark. I mean, again, these are going to be treasures for people to learn the history and see it at the same time.
Well, I thought I had found someone to pass the wand on to. Jess Davis passed it to me, and been looking for years, and I thought it was going to be Larry Reynolds, and he's bolted on us.
Yeah,
But, you know, you got to do what you got to do.
that's right.
I called him.
Yeah.
Said, what's going on? Is there something I don't know about? because we'd become fairly close, and I was going to work with him about, still going to try to work something out about
Yeah.
getting the collapsible archives in here at some point.
Yeah.
If I can ever sell my property out of the lake. But yeah, it's a good idea.
The stairs are killers.
Is it your back or your knee?
Well, mostly my muscles.
Oh, your muscles, okay.
My quadriceps left me some years ago.
This is a nice little entrance. Okay. There she is.
Thank you so much. I really
Well-
think this was just wonderful.
Thank you so much.
And for you to have a copy of it, you're going to love having that and
I'll give it to
say,
the kids.
oops, I missed this, or
Yeah.
oh, we need to go back and do that.
Well, I've got two more little things. One is the, not little, the big things. One is the Barrow Basalski memoirs, Mary and I, for the kids. I'm working on that.
Yeah.
And then the other is this, The Lost Art of Bedside Manner.
Yeah.
I got hung up on trying to master dragon dictation, and it's
Oh, give it
technically it's just beyond me.